Haqiqatjou says, under Sharia, Muhammad was allowed to marry Aisha when she was 6. Would this be allowed under your system, Daniel?
I mean, this is something that many cultures practice to this day, and it's based on this biological reality. And you find many cultures where they're trying to maximize the fertility window of women because they want to have more children. And this is basically the way that evolutionary psychologists explain it. And I'm not promoting evolution, but these are people that you would respect, Harris or other atheists. They say that it's actually to an evolutionary advantage to maximize the fertility window so you have as many children as possible, because women only have about 25 to 30 years of fertility. If they wait until they're 25 or 30 or 35 to get married and have kids or have sex, then that means they'll only have maybe one, maximum 2 children. But this will allow extinction of the population and for the people to be wiped out. So this goes back to what Lawrence Keeley says, and this is why you find it in so many societies in the pre-modern period and even today, because it's biologically hardwired. And you have a discussion actually about whether marrying children who are pubescent, okay, so around 10 years old, 9 years old, this is something that there's a dispute and a debate within psychology whether this is a psychological disorder. And your secular atheist psychologists say that no, it can't be considered a dysfunction because it is practiced in these societies. It's evolutionarily adaptive, so it's not actually causing any harm. And when we look at the girls and the women in these societies, there's nothing that is dysfunctional about them and problematic. What's interesting is that that is not considered marriage to 9-year-olds is not considered pedophilia. What is pedophilia are the practices of modern pedophiles who go into the closet and diddle little kids. That's abhorrent. That is an abomination. Islam does not promote that. Islam promotes marriage. It promotes family. It promotes these wholesome values, and other societies have practiced this as well. I mean, Richard Dawkins actually is on record speaking in multiple interviews where he actually defends mild pedophilia.
Let's move on to the next one. I hate to do that, but so many. We have a ton of questions, you guys, and so
so according to Richard Dawkins' standards, like, what is the objection that Richard Dawkins would have? And he's tweeted about this, like, these trolls, like these atheist liberals, Christian trolls, Hindutva trolls, like especially Christians and Hindutva, they have no ground to stand on to criticize the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Christians, Jews, Zionists, they don't have any ground to stand on because these were all these things were practiced by their civilizations. Some of them are still practicing it today. It's in their religious texts. So how are you criticizing it? Atheists are trying to criticize the marriage of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And you have Richard Dawkins, the most prominent intellectual atheist in the world, and he defends mild pedophilia, something like a disgusting practice, and he says we can't condemn people of the past by our standards today, like this nonsense that I just quoted you. So also the study that I cited, I'll just put it on the screen here. Can you see this? Okay. Hebephilia as mental disorder, a historical, cross-cultural, sociological, cross-species, non-clinical, empirical, and evolutionary review. So this is pretty comprehensive. It's by Bruce Rind. Archives of Sexual Behavior, published in 2012. And this is a debate, like Blanchard et al. Make a claim that hebephilia is a genuine sexual preference, but then propose, without arguments or evidence, that it should be designated as a mental disorder. So hebephilia meaning attraction to pubescent girls, like 10 years old, 9 years old. This is hebephilia. They say it is like its own sexual preference, distinct from pedophilia. Pedophilia, like wanting to diddle little kids, that's a separate thing than hebephilia. And this whole paper is arguing that Blanchard, without argument or evidence, is saying that it's a mental disorder. So, a series of letters to the editor criticized this proposal as a non sequitur. Blanchard, in rebuttal, reaffirmed his position, but without adequately addressing some central criticisms. In this article, we examine hebephilia as disorder in full detail. Unlike Blanchard et al., we discuss definitions of mental disorder, examine extensive evidence from a broad range of sources, and consider alternative, i.e., non-pathological explanations for it. We employed Wakefield's harmful dysfunction approach to disorder, which holds that a condition only counts as a disorder when it is a failure of a naturally selected mechanism to function as designed, which is harmful to the individual in the current environment. We also considered a harmful for others approach to disorder, examination of historical, cross-cultural, sociological, cross-species, non-clinical, empirical, and evolutionary evidence and perspectives indicated that hebephilic interest is an evolved capacity and hebephilic preference an expectable distributional variant, both of which were adaptively neutral or functional, not dysfunctional in earlier human environments. Hebephilia's conflict with modern society, its conflict with modern liberal society basically makes it an evolutionary mismatch, not a genuine disorder. Though it should not be classified as a disorder, it should be entered in the DSM-5's code section, corrected section, used for non-disordered conditions that create significant problems in present-day society. Yeah, because you have a completely different, you've reordered society into the modern dystopia that we live in. So this is pretty clear, because when you're a materialist and you are a pure materialist based on a secular view of the world, you don't have any moral guidance coming from God. You don't accept any authority other than, empirical science, then how are you going to decide if something is good or bad? You have to look at function versus dysfunction. Is something adaptive, non-adaptive, using evolutionary? And really there is kind of a naturalistic fallacy or appeal to nature fallacy that happens with this kind of reasoning. This is like a deeper critique of psychology overall. But putting all of those philosophical considerations aside, we want to just take psychology at face value. They're looking at, is this actually a dysfunctional behavior for a 20-year-old, a 30-year-old, a 50-year-old to marry a 10-year-old, marry a 9-year-old, to marry an 11-year-old? And the answer is no. When you look at historically, when you look at sociologically, even societies today that practice that, it doesn't cause this kind of psychological harm. This is the paper, this is the evidence for that. And it's backed by other studies that they cite in their references. So, and evolutionarily, it's adaptive for the reasons that I mentioned because of the fertility window. And when we look at Aisha radiallahu anha, the mother of the believers, what dysfunction did she suffer from? She's considered one of the greatest scholars of the ummah, one of the most knowledgeable women of the ummah, transmitted the most hadith out of any woman of the ummah, taught so many of the Sahaba and the Tabi'een and the Tabi'een. And what was dysfunctional about her? Okay? As opposed to people who are victims of pedophilia. And, it's very sad. The kind of pedophilia that Richard Dawkins defends, those people have lasting damage. Those people have lasting problems psychologically, sometimes physically, because they've been molested by people around them, by these teachers around them. They've been molested. That's pedophilia. That is abuse that Richard Dawkins defends. Marrying someone who is at a younger age than what your society, the average age of marriage happens, that doesn't necessarily make it dysfunctional or abusive or a psychological problem. So stop with the stupid arguments.